Okay, we are in the book of Hebrews. We are in chapter 6. Continuing in that, last week we got to verse 8, and we will speak of that in just a second. Last week I spoke briefly at the beginning concerning the people that the writer of Hebrews is writing to, who his audience was. And I didn't have my notes in front of me at the time, so I was trying to wing it without the notes, but now I have my notes in front of me. And there's just some things about them that are unique. Some things that can be known from this writing. Okay, we don't know who they were exactly. We don't know where they were exactly. We do know that this is going to a specific place, as I can only assume a city, a town, a someplace. A congregation is, and that congregation has to be somewhere. It is going to a congregation. It's obvious that it is. But we know that they are extremely familiar with the Old Testament. They are. And coming up, probably today, we're going to look at a statement at least that shows they must have a good understanding of the Old Testament. Also, they have rulers over them who are faithful. That would be elders. And we see that in chapter 13, verses 7, 17, and 24. They have become dull of hearing, 5:11. We already read that. They have not matured spiritually. We see that at the end of chapter 5 and also in 6 in verse 9. They have done good works in the past. So while they have not matured spiritually, they have done good works in the past, 6:10, and they also do good works in the present, also 6:10. They have good people with them and people they can imitate, people that they can follow. So not all of them are languishing, we might say, or just not maturing. Some have matured. They're people that they can follow. That's 6:12. They know the writer, and from 5:11 and 12, 6 and verse 10, 10 verses 32 and 34, they know the writer. They have helped and supported the writer financially. That's from 10:34. They have been persecuted. That's chapter 12, verses 3 and 4. They know Timothy, chapter 13, verse 23. And they are not in Italy. We can know that, chapter 13, 24. We can't know where they are other than they're not in Italy. Now, I want to make mention of this. We have talked about it briefly in a couple of times at least in studying this. But Hebrews is filled with implication and inference. I'm going to show the difference. What's the difference between implication and inference? Because there is a difference. It's a matter of the one communicating and also the one who's being communicated to. You could think of it as the one who's throwing the ball and the one who's catching the ball. Okay, there's a big difference between the pitcher and the catcher. Okay, one is throwing it, one is catching it. So the communicator, now this is the English language, okay, imply is what the communicator does. I implied this in my message. All right, that's implication. Inference is what the reader or the listener does. I inferred from his speech. I inferred from his letter. I inferred from something that he said. Okay, that is a difference. And there are people who say there is no implication found in the Bible. And as I have said, either they don't know implication, or they don't know their Bible, or they don't know both. They don't know either one, or they're just lying. Okay. Because the Bible is full of implied messages. And the Holy Spirit authoring, inspiring the book of Hebrews is in fact teaching us, and this isn't the only place by no means, but is teaching us how to handle implied messages. And we are to use a rational mind, think things through logically. And it's very simple, but it's there. If we say, okay, let's say Billy is shorter than Sue, and Margaret is taller than Sue. While we didn't have a statement saying Billy is smaller than Margaret, we didn't have that as a direct statement, but we can know. If Sue is taller than Billy and Margaret is taller than Sue, we know what? Margaret's got to be taller than Billy. Though it didn't say that in so many words, we can know that obviously it's logical. It's logical that that's the way it is. Okay? Now, that is precisely what the Bible does in numerous places. We say, and it is true, the Bible teaches by direct statement. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. Direct statements. And it's not, and while it sounded like I'm just referring to the Ten Commandments, I'm not just referring to the Ten Commandments as being the only direct statements. There's a lot of direct statements. There's a lot of direct statements in the Sermon on the Mount. A lot of direct statements. There's also implication and metaphor, things like that in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, there are implied messages in the Bible, and they exist, and this is what we are to do with them, because the Holy Spirit is showing implied messages from the past, and Jesus did the same thing. Jesus did the same thing. The Christ, whose son is he? And the response was David. And he quotes Psalm 110:1, and the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. And he says, David, how could David call him Lord? That is an implied message, and Jesus is using inference to bring that out. Now, the Hebrews writer begins in chapter 1, showing inference off of Old Testament scriptures to prove Jesus is greater than the angels. And he uses Psalm 2, 2 Timothy 7, Psalm 104, Psalm 45, Psalm 102, Psalm 110, just in that chapter, to show the implied message in all of those, that he is greater than the angels. And when we begin chapter 2, he starts with a conclusion because of what has been implied by those scriptures, by those statements. Therefore, we must give the more earnest heed to the things we have heard, lest we drift away. Verse 2, for if the word spoken through angels proved steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just reward. Verse 3, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by those who heard him? Okay, now we have a conclusion off of all of those Psalms plus 2 Samuel 7. Okay, all of those statements, we now have a conclusion from it. And he's starting from chapter 1 and then going into chapter 2 with more implications and also showing examples as well. Bad examples, tells us to follow good examples, but there is implication and inference going all the way through the book of Hebrews. In chapter 11 is nothing but implied messages of following good examples. Implied messages from the faith of this person, that person did this, following that faith. What does that mean to us? There's an implication there. What does that mean for us? Now that we have gone through that, let's get to our text. Last week, we went through all the way to verse 8, and going from verses 4 to 8 was a discussion with those Christians who have fallen away. Okay, and we made a distinction between those who have been just drifting away, and those drifting away and going astray because of, it could be various reasons. Things that they've not understood, things that they have learned from the world, and they're going astray. And making a distinction between that, and that person can be brought back much more easier than the next person. The next person is someone who's just rebellious. Someone, and we went to Luke chapter 16, someone like the prodigal son, Luke 15, prodigal son who just leaves the father wanting nothing to do with him or anything that he represents except his money. Okay, he wants his money and he wants to be gone. That's the prodigal. And there is a distinction made by Christ in Luke 15, and we can see things like that being shown to us by way of example, of various examples. Corinth, the congregation at Corinth being one, but they're not the only ones. Peter being another. But let's begin now in verse 9. So we're in chapter 6, verse 9. And we're in a ending that discussion concerning falling away and concerning the fact that they have not matured. He says this, but beloved, we are confident of better things concerning you. Okay, we're confident that there's going to be better things. You have not been maturing like you should be, and we don't need to go back to the elementary principles and reestablish those things. There needs to be not just the taking milk as nourishment, but need to grow to where you can take solid food. There's got to be solid food done here. And then you have that discussion of someone who has just completely rebelled against God, fallen away, gone right back out into the world, celebrating that, loving that. But he says, beloved, we are confident of better things concerning you, yes, things that accompany salvation, though we speak in this manner. Okay? Now, he says, better things concerning you, things that accompany salvation, which means there is a behavior expected out of the saved. There's a behavior expected out of everybody, and salvation is for everybody. But there is, as Paul states in Ephesians chapter 4 in verse 1, walk worthy of the calling by which you have been called. Okay, walk worthy of that calling. There is a behavior. There is something that accompanies salvation, and that is good works, a good heart, conscientious living, conscientious learning. All that is expected. Those are those better things. Now verse 10, for God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward His name. Now we mentioned that earlier, that the writer of Hebrews, that audience, that primary or first audience, they did good works in their past. And he says God's not going to forget those things. He's not unjust to forget those things. And you've known folks, and you just have to, of where you've done them something really good and really sacrificial, and they just kind of forgot it. They just forgot that you ever did such a thing. And, well, you did a good work. But God's not like that. God's not like that. That He remembers. Just like in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, there are 7 churches of Asia that are being addressed. And in every one, in addressing each congregation, Christ says, I know your works, I know your labor, and then continues to talk about either what they've done right or what they've done wrong. Because only with a couple of them, he had nothing negative to say about them. but what they've done right or what they've done wrong. And he knows the condition and history of those congregations and of every Christian. And here, the writer says, God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love which you have shown toward His name. You've done it toward His name. You've not done it for any other reason. You've done it because you know He wants you to do that. You've done it because that is what you've been taught from Him that you should be doing. Though we speak in this manner, well, speak in these exhortations, which he just got through doing in verse 8. With these exhortations that really begins at the end of chapter 5, talking about them being dull of hearing, and also, I think it was 5:11, been dull of hearing, and then talking about the fact that they haven't matured, and then into chapter 6 of the foundation. Do these things need to be laid down again? These fundamental principles of Christ, does that need to be done? And then talking about falling away. Though we speak in this manner, it's in the manner of admonitions. And he's going to do this again in chapter 13:22 of speaking in this manner. Now, verse 10. Okay, we've already... we need to finish verse 10. For God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward His name, and that you have, I'm sorry, I got confused, but that was something I needed to say anyway. In that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. Okay? You've ministered to the saints and you continue to do it. So there are things in the past that they have done, and there are things in the present that they continue to do. They're ministering to the saints. And so this is admired by the writer and says that God won't forget these things. Verse 11, and we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to full assurance of hope until the end. Okay, so is everybody doing that? Maybe not. Maybe not everyone. But he's saying each of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end. This is not just short term, this is lifelong, and also there is a diligence that is involved that is a lifelong diligence. There is something expected, and we are to be diligent in it. Ministering to the saints, yes. Doing those good works, that labor of love, yes. All that is expected and to be done with a diligence to the end. Are there times when we can become weary of doing good? Yes, obviously so. And Paul speaks to Timothy, don't grow weary. Don't. Keep going. When you think that it's time to just give up, that's when you got to redouble your efforts. When you think it's time that, okay, I have done enough here, I can't possibly do any more, everything seems to be working against all of this labor, it doesn't seem to be producing much of anything, if anything visible whatsoever, you don't become weary of it. Keep going. Keep going, always. Now, it's that diligence that is expected, and it's an expected level of diligence as well. Show the same diligence. Now, verse 12, that you do not become sluggish. Here's more admonition, that you don't become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. So there are people in place who can be imitated. These are examples of obedience. There are people these people to be imitated are in fact inheriting the promise. So if you want to inherit the promise, you want to imitate what they're doing. You want to imitate that diligence. You want to imitate their devotion. You want to imitate their life because they are inheriting the promises. And so he's saying there are people you can imitate. There are people that they're worth imitating because they're doing right. They're doing well. Don't become sluggish. Don't become sluggish. That continue on in that diligence. Okay? And yes, we can become sluggish. Just like we can become discouraged, that we can become weary, just things getting us down. It's time to get back up and go. And we can feel at times like in Elijah, they're being utterly discouraged. And there we are in the cave, all right, and thinking the worst sort of things of just go ahead and take me. There are no faithful. There's nobody faithful. I'm the last one alive. Just let's call this to an end. Just take me. Well, that's a discouraged man. And yeah, that's going to happen. That's going to happen not to just in Elijah. That can happen to anybody. And let's look at these last words. But imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. So here we have this concerning promises. Concerning the promise. Because we're getting into a section now concerning a promise. And he's using this by way of example. That God promises and he keeps those promises. So, verse 13, for when God made a promise to Abraham because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself. Now, he's about to quote Genesis 22:17. Genesis 22:17. And we're going to read this. Blessing, I will bless you. This is God. This is Jehovah speaking to Abraham. Blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies. There is Psalm 22:7. I did it again. Genesis 22:17. And here he says, verse 14, so Galatians 6, verse 14, saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. There are oaths in, I don't know that we've spoken about this, maybe we have. There are 3 oaths that are shown in the book of Hebrews. 3 oaths by God that are shown. The first one was that oath against the rebellious in the wilderness of Israel, rebelling in the wilderness. And it was that oath of they will not see my rest. They will not see the rest that he had for them. They wouldn't live to see it. They would not be part of it. But here we have this next oath. And this one it's another promise, and it is toward Abraham, but the promise of blessing him, multiplying him. Okay, let's go back to verse 13. For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself. Why did he do that? It's going to tell us why. Saying, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. And so after he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. All right. Who's the he? That's Abraham. So that after Abraham patiently endured, Abraham obtained the promise. Yes. The promise, however, had requirements. It had requirements to it. Because it says, after he had patiently endured. There is a promise, but with that promise, there's the expectation from Abraham that he was to endure, whatever it was. Endure through this life. And of course, Abraham, at 75 years old, he's called, and he's not to have a home, a permanent home anymore. He did have one, but he's called away from there, and he's going to be traveling for the rest of his life. And at 75, you've got deep roots, okay? And so he and Sarah and actually his nephew Lot, they are going to be traveling now Lot's going to settle in Sodom. Bad idea, but he's spared from it, though much of his family is not. Abraham is going to be following God for the rest of his life and seeing promises, but never seeing those promises being fulfilled, which Hebrews 11 is going to address that. Never seeing those promises fulfilled. Nevertheless, having faith that in time they would be fulfilled. They were never promised in his lifetime. They were not promised in his lifetime, but that it would occur. And there are some things that he knew couldn't occur in his lifetime. As we just read from Genesis 22, got it right that time, Genesis 22:17, that there's going to be a multitude of people who are his descendants that can't even be counted. Well, he knows that can't happen in his lifetime. He knows that. It's just not feasibly possible. So, he's patiently endured. Now, verse 16, for men indeed swear by the greater. This is going by why God swore by himself. There is nothing greater. For men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is for them an end of all dispute. And this would be a cultural thing. Today, if someone says, I swear on my mother's grave, it means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. You just wasted your breath. I don't care. And you've seen things like that before. And that such things mean nothing. It is swearing by the greater. But with honest folks, it does have a meaning. With honest folks, and with Jesus, he says, let your yes be yes and your nay be nay. You know, let it just tell the truth. Tell what you're actually willing to do. If it's something that you're willing to do, let it be a yes. You don't have to add to it. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And that's enough. But God is going to swear by himself because he cannot swear by anything greater than himself. And the text tells us why he does it. Okay, first off, 16 again, for men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is for them an end of all dispute. So I promise this is going to happen, and I take an oath by that which is greater. Okay, verse 17, thus God determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath. Okay, we're going to take this bit by bit. God wants to show more abundantly of that his promise is true. This is a greater emphasis. It's a greater assurance. It's as great of an assurance as you can possibly expect. God assuring you by himself, this oath by himself, that this is going to be true. And this is very similar in what God says concerning the Christ in Psalm 110 and verse 4. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. There's no going back on this. There's none. Now, he's going to bring this passage up in the book of Hebrews. Matter of fact, he's going to repeat it numerous times. And the fact is that God saying these things is showing more abundantly the immutability of His counsel. What is immutability? That is the fact. If something is immutable, that means it cannot be changed. It's unchangeable. It's utterly firm. Now, when we deal with people, there is nothing that we could say is absolutely firm when we're dealing with people's words. We can't say. You can say, well, I trust that person, or I've always trusted that person, or whatever. People can still let you down. God will not. He will not. And so to make this or show this more abundantly, He's confirmed it by an oath. This is unalterable. Now, this is to the heirs of promise. Now, who are the heirs of promise? Well, that's precisely what God swears on, or swears about, takes that oath about, that you will have these descendants. Blessing, I will bless you. Multiplying, I will multiply you. The heirs of promise are what? What it comes down to are the righteous. The righteous who live by and have the faith of Abraham. And we receive that information from Romans chapter 4, in verse 16. All right, but we have a section there concerning his faith. But Romans chapter 4, verse 16. Now, we read verse 17 again. Thus God determined to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise the immutability of His counsel, confirmed it with an oath. So this is unchangeable. This is unalterable. Verse 18, that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. Now we're going to go through this bit by bit. That by two immutable things. First off, God cannot lie. And it's going to make that clear in the next phrase. But you have two immutable things, unchangeable things. What are those two unchangeable things? One is the promise, the other is the oath. Those are absolutely unchangeable. And really, it is tied to Psalm 110:4 that God says that He would not relent. He would not relent. That there in Psalm 110:4, and I just want to make sure I get every word correct because I don't have it exactly in front of it. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. Now, these are connected because if there is no Christ, because Psalm 110 deals with the Christ. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. That is Jehovah, and I prefer to render it this way, or read it this way. Jehovah said to my Lord, because that's the way it should be rendered. Jehovah said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Okay, that's the Christ. And then he says that Jehovah has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. If there is no priest forever under the order of Melchizedek, that means there is no Christ. If there is no Christ, there can be no promise concerning the faithful. Those that have the faith of Abraham, and the promise given to Abraham goes to nothing. It's all connected. It's all connected to the fact that from Abraham there would be the Christ eventually in time. And as we just said, even Abraham understood that the things he was being told were things in the distant future. He knew that. Now, he may not have understood that that actually goes all the way through time. He may not have understood that, but he could know from the message that it could not be something that was going to happen within the next couple of weeks or even in his lifetime. He knew that had to be the case, and he would have been right in that. Now, by two immutable things, unalterable, the promise and the oath, they will never be altered because they are imperative. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. What about when you have the Son of God in the Garden of Gethsemane? It wasn't too many weeks ago. It was earlier this year, I think, or late last year. We were there with Christ's prayer in the garden, and it was with great sorrow and extraordinary anguish, and he is praying, if this cup can pass, let it pass. Nevertheless, your will be done. Okay, if this cup can pass, if there is another way. But the Lord swore and would not relent. He's not going to relent, even when the Son of God is praying if there is another way. But the Son of God also says, your will be done. He will not relent. And that is that's very strong language, by the way. And it is strong language because it's going to involve matters like the Son of God dying on the earth. He's not going to relent. And if we were to, now we made mention that Psalm 110:4 concerning your priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, that from that would be a mysterious thing. A mysterious thing. Because if you don't have the New Testament, you don't know what that means. You can know it concerns the Messiah, but you can't know what it means. And why that such strong language that Jehovah has sworn and will not relent. Something important is in that message. We can know that. Something very, very important is there. And the promise that actually goes all the way back to Genesis 3:15 can't be fulfilled if any of this is stopped or changed. It can't be fulfilled. And that includes the promise to Abraham. That would include the promise to the Messiah and to us as well. Now, let's continue on verse 18. That by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we've already mentioned, God cannot lie. And this is one of those passages telling us He's not going to lie to us. And as we have said before, if God lies to us, we as a creation have a problem. A big problem. God does not lie. In which is, okay, so I'm going to just put these two together. And by two immutable things, we might have strong consolation. Now, what is that consolation? We already made mention of that word before. It means that of comfort. It means security. It means also encouragement because of the comfort that has been there. It's a strong comfort because of His promise and because of His oath. Things that cannot lie. No, He can't lie. Things that cannot change. They're immutable. They cannot change. And then speaking of those who have fled for refuge and lay hold of the hope set before us. What is that hope? That hope is precisely what he's been talking about. That hope concerning the Christ and salvation. That hope of being those who are in the faith or a child of Abraham. that is that hope of salvation, that hope of something far greater, that hope of that Christ in fact brings us, and that hope of heaven. It's all there. And our time has run out for this morning, and we will continue in verse 19. Well, let's just read it, and we'll begin here again. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which enters the presence behind the veil. Now, this is the passage I was actually referring to earlier when I said those that he is writing to, they have a very good knowledge of the Old Testament, extremely good knowledge, because he doesn't explain what the veil is. You got to know what the veil is for you to understand this. Now, he's going to speak a little bit more concerning this, but that presence behind the veil, what's that referring to? If you don't know the Old Testament, the book of Hebrews you're going to be in a quandary, all right? Because there's a lot of references that are going back to the Old Testament, and basic stuff, really, going back to the Old Testament, except for, I will say this, except for that of Melchizedek, because Melchizedek has been spoken of an awful lot. But there's obviously something important being said about him, not just in Genesis 14, where we see him just his name mentioned once, and then Psalm 110:4, where Jehovah is swearing to the fact that someone, that would be the Christ, is going to be a priest forever under the order of Melchizedek. But here, this presence behind the veil, this would be a very, very simple thing from the Old Testament. They would have understood it. And, okay, we'll continue next week, and thank you, everybody.